gun violence in Oregon. This is our first attempt to have a hybrid meeting where one presenter, Thomas Wheatley, is remote, and our other three great presenters are here in person. There's a lot of technical difficulties here and challenges to make this happen. One of the things I've just learned is for Thomas to be able to hear each of the speakers, we need to have each speaker step up to this computer so they'll be able to hear them through the microphone on this computer. Jonathan is attempting to get it to work so we could be able to hear Thomas. Do you think that's going to be able to happen, Jonathan?
I think so.
Okay.
He's trying out right now.
First, he's with the Oregon Alliance for Gun Safety, and he's going to be telling us more about the status of Measure 114 and Oregon legislative priorities. We also have with us here in person Anthony Broadman, who, as you know, is a Bend City Councilor. He's also working with building safer communities across Bend. In the middle is Dr. Rick Teitz, an emergency physician at St. Charles. He's a community partner with Moms Demand Action. He'll be discussing the impacts of gun violence on himself, colleagues, and the community. He also works on gun violence prevention programs at St. Charles Healthcare Systems. And Juniper, who has been working on gun control issues and gun safety issues for 5 years, if you can believe it. She is a high school student leader and March for Our Lives volunteer leader through the Redmond Proficiency Academy. She will be talking about the experience of youth in today's climate of gun violence. So there you have it. We have some really great presenters, and thank you so much, Jonathan, for working it out to have Thomas here with us remotely. So I will first turn it over to you, Thomas, for you to give some opening comments. And I understand that Caroline Fitchett, who arranged this panel, has said that you would be leading some of the questions to our speakers who are here in person. People are so interested in this topic. We have about 30 people in the room, one of the biggest turnouts that we've actually had since we started doing our in-person presentations. And I even have questions that have been emailed in from members who can't attend today. So take it away, Thomas.
That's great, and thanks so much for having me. I wasn't aware that I was supposed to facilitate the second half of the back and forth, but I'm happy to do whatever is helpful, and I'm excited to be part of this conversation. I'm so sorry I wasn't able to be there in person. Getting over the mountain, as you all know, in this time of year is pretty hit or miss. And I've got 2 kids in school, so I try to limit my travel during the middle of the week when possible. Again, my name is Thomas Wheatley. I use he and him pronouns. I'm an independent consultant based in Portland, Oregon. I work with the nonprofit organization Oregon Alliance for Gun Safety, which seeks to reduce and address our crisis of gun violence here in Oregon. We are a small but rapidly growing organization. We have an education arm and a political arm as well. And we work in elections and in the legislature and with public education. So what I thought I would do is just to level set, talk a little bit about the state of gun violence in Oregon, and then I will give folks the scoop and the skinny on where things are at in the legislature this year, and what the latest is in the legal battles on ballot measure 114, Oregon's new gun safety law. So just to level set and by way of background, Oregon has significantly higher rates of gun violence than either of our 2 neighbors, Washington or California. In fact, our rates of gun violence, I think, are roughly 60% higher than in California. There are almost two simultaneous crises of gun violence in Oregon that are interrelated, but they're different. 79% of gun deaths in Oregon are firearm suicides. So the bulk, that's 4 out of 5 of deaths from guns come from self-inflicted suicide with a firearm. likely to be from shootings. So suicides, firearm suicides skew and are disproportionately seen among rural communities, and particularly older and male communities. But shootings and homicides, firearm homicides, are disproportionately younger and urban, and particularly impact Black and brown communities. So both of these are issues and parts of our kind of public health crisis of gun violence, and they each deserve a unique and tailored approach when it comes to social change, culture change, and policy change. So Oregon, over the last number of years, has implemented a number of the basic gun violence prevention policies that many states that are taking proactive action on this have put in place. We require universal background checks. We require that firearms be stored safely. We have in place a procedure called Extreme Risk Protection Order that allows members of law enforcement or family members to petition the courts if someone they know in their family or in the public is an immediate threat to themselves or others, and they can petition to have firearms removed from the household. We have a procedure that allows for people who are filing a domestic violence restraining order against an abuser to have firearms removed from the household of the abuser, who is subject to that restraining order. And we have just recently started investing in upstream early prevention of gun violence, particularly in communities impacted by shootings and homicides, gun homicides. And then last year, Oregon took this ginormous, amazing, exciting leap forward by passing ballot measure 114, which limits the sale and use of high-capacity ammunition magazines. That is, ammunition magazines that can fire more than 10 bullets without needing to reload. This is kind of the tool of choice in mass shootings. And by implementing and requiring a permit to purchase a firearm. So that's kind of where things are. That policy was passed, but is not currently operational because it's under judicial scrutiny. So let me say where we are on ballot measure 114. It turns out that the gun lobby, the gun manufacturers, and the national gun lobby seems to have made a strategic decision. They opposed ballot measure 114 when it was up for a public vote, but they didn't spend a lot of money. And it turns out that what they were doing was they were holding their money in order to hire lawyers afterward, after the voters passed it, and challenge it in court. There have been now 5 separate lawsuits filed against ballot measure 114, or the new gun safety law, by basically every national gun lobby organization in the country, as well as the major ones in Oregon. They filed 1 case in state court and 4 separate cases in federal court. So, and in order to, and those cases, the federal court cases and the state court cases proceed and are proceeding on parallel tracks. And in order to make sure that to get the ballot measure implemented, we have to have both the state courts and the federal courts agree that ballot measure 114 is constitutional and can be implemented. So the state case is the one that's actually holding us up the most right now. That case was filed in Hardin County by several local gun shops and a national gun lobby organization. And that judge put a temporary hold on that prevents the law from going into effect and prevents it from being implemented until they can have a full trial. So that's the case that is stopping 114 from going into effect right now. We think that trial hopefully will get scheduled for late spring or early summer, but it might not get scheduled until the fall. They haven't decided their timeline yet. So that's a big delay. The 4 federal cases, they tried in those cases also to get the federal judge to put a temporary hold on the measure pending trial. She declined to do so. The judge in federal court is a very smart jurist very thoughtful, and very detail-oriented. And we expect that those 4 cases will go to trial in June in federal court. And again, we have to win in both federal court and state court in order to be able to implement the policy. Long term, we feel very good about our path in state court. That the case against 114 in state court, which claims that under the Oregon state constitution, 114 is not constitutional, that case doesn't really hold water. So as that case makes its way through the courts and up on appeal, we feel very, very good about that. We have to do that work, and nothing is guaranteed, but I think that lawyers we talk to feel like we're on very solid legal ground. In federal court, the United States Supreme Court, folks may remember, issued a new ruling, a landmark ruling on gun safety policy last summer. It was in the same month when they ruled in the big ruling on Roe v. Wade, this new conservative court. And so we still feel like in federal court, the policy 114 is on good, solid legal ground. But that ground is shifting a little bit under our feet as we speak in federal courts. And so it's going to take time to work through that system. Our hope is that as the courts continue to deliberate on the Measure 114 case in federal court, that they allow the policy to go into effect so that we can take advantage of its life-saving provisions in the near term, because federal court cases take a long time. Let's say 3, 4, 5 more years to make their way through the process. And it's possible, it's conceivable that our ballot measure case could end up in front of the Supreme Court one day. So in fact, our organization, Oregon Alliance for Gun Safety, has hired a top-notch legal team to intervene in that case, and we are part of the legal defense of 114 and making arguments in court, preparing for court. That's the status of the ballot measure in court. Let me shift to talk to folks about what's going on in the legislature, and then I'll pause and be excited to hear the other panelists. The legislature is where the vast majority of our gun safety policy is written, and that's how it's designed to be, right? Sometimes the voters, when the legislature refused to take action, then the voters take action, which is what happened last year, which is very exciting. But most of our gun policy is really the purview of the Oregon legislature. So this year, the legislature is looking at a number of really smart, well-researched, evidence-based policies to advance gun safety in Oregon. There are 3 that I'll lift up. They're all originating in the House. The first is House Bill 2005. And what this does is it regulates the production and distribution and use of so-called ghost guns. Folks may know that you can buy a plan online and use a 3D printer to 3D print a basic firearm that actually works and fires bullets and can cause harm. You can also go online, unfortunately, and to websites and purchase through mail and have mailed to you a kit to build your own handgun. And neither of those processes, which we call, both of them are ghost guns, neither of them involve the normal review and background check that a firearm purchaser has to go through to make sure that they're legally allowed to purchase a firearm, right? And so ghost guns have become much, much more prominent and prevalent and common in the community and are used in the activity of crimes. And so we want to make sure that we are giving law enforcement the appropriate tools to address this and to make sure these ghost guns are illegal and appropriately regulated. So that's House Bill 2005 that we hope will have a hearing in a few weeks in the House. House Bill 2006 increases the age to purchase semi-automatic rifles from 18 to 21. You have to be 21 to buy beer. You have to be 21 to purchase a handgun. But right now, you can go to a sporting goods store at age 18 and buy a semi-automatic assault weapon. And the goal of HB 2006 is to increase to age 21, the required age to purchase and to possess a semi-automatic rifle. That's the second bill. The third bill is HB 2007, so 2005, 2006, 2007. That bill allows local governments, like cities or counties, to prohibit firearms in their public county or city buildings. A similar policy was passed recently that allows the state of Oregon to prohibit carrying of firearms in state buildings and allows school districts to implement a policy prohibiting the carrying of firearms in their school grounds. And we're hopeful the legislature will expand that tool to allow local governments to do the same. That's HB 2007. It is also an effort to get the state of Oregon to invest further public dollars in gun violence prevention work. That's community-based prevention work to reduce the likelihood that somebody will pick up a firearm and use it in a dangerous fashion. And then will probably be some policy that will make some technical fixes to ballot measure 114. And hopefully there'll be budget allocated from the state to be able to implement 114 so that as soon as the courts lift the stay, the prevention on implementation, that the budget will be available to implement 114. So let me just wrap up by saying, like any other significant social change issue, this one is one where sometimes it takes a little time to get the policies you want passed, and then to get the ones you passed implemented effectively. And what matters is that we stick with it. I got involved in this work, my father, I think I mentioned, I got involved in this work when my son came home from first grade and told me he had been taught that day on how to do an active shooter drill. And I was so outraged and angry as a dad, and so sad about the state of our country that my then 7-year-old child had this experience. And I know many of you in the room, I'm sure, have had your own experience with gun violence and your own losses in your own family and network, or from gun violence. And I think when I think about the tough road to pursue, implement, defend, continue to defend, and advance more policies on gun violence prevention, we know these policies work. We know we can reduce our gun suicide rate, our gun homicide rate, our gun shooting rate, our accidental shooting rate. We just have to stick with it. So excited to hear the rest of the panelists, and I'll stick around to listen in and answer any questions. Thanks.
It's great to get an update on status of Measure 114. It's good to see everybody. My name is, can everybody hear me?
No.
There's no microphone here, so I'll just yell as much as I can. My name is Anthony Broadman. I'm a Bend City Councilor. For those of you living in Bend, represent you on the City Council along with Mayor Keebler and my fellow councilors. I'm really happy to be here. It's good to see so many familiar faces, and it's good to be in the same room. Particularly grateful to my fellow panel members who I've seen speak before, and I think you're in for a lot of really good information and experience. Particularly thank you to Thomas for his advocacy on behalf of Measure 114. Thomas, I just thanked you, but you probably couldn't hear it. Thank you. In my day job, I'm an attorney. I'm a tribal court appellate judge. And I really came to public service, to the practice of law. I'm certainly on city council because of gun violence. When I was 12 years old, a gunman entered my father's courtroom and took a shot at him and missed him by an inch, and it affected my entire childhood. And in fact, it affected my entire family. And it set me on a path really that led me to council and led me to the practice of law, really seeking order in the face of disorder, policies that keep us all safer in a world where it can be pretty scary for our kids in particular, and for our entire community. Measure 114 is one such tool that I believe will make us safer. I hope you all saw Bend City Council stand up and unanimously get behind Measure 114. I had the honor of debating the folks that the gun lobby put up on KTVZ. And what I heard from my folks, from all of you, from our constituents here in Bend, was that we are sick and tired of this being an us versus them issue. This is something we all agree upon, that gun violence is unacceptable, and that we should take the common sense firearm safety measures that we all know work because of data to keep our kids safer, to keep our cities safer, to keep our rural neighbors safer, particularly when it comes to suicide. Measure 114 was a common sense, very middle of the road gun safety regulatory measure that I am confident when it goes into effect will make all of us safer. We have to resist, again, this us versus them mentality that the fringes want to make you think is the reality, when in reality, the 90% of us in the middle, 90+% of us in the middle, want our kids to be safe at school. We want to be safe when we go to church. We want to be safe when we go grocery shopping. We want to be safe at City Hall when we have forums for democracy where people can come in and feel safe to voice their opinions and petition their government. That's the community that we want to live in. Measure 114 will get us there. I'll give you a quick update on where we are at the city. A lot of people during Measure 114's, during the campaign, before and after, are asking us, what are you doing to make us safer in our city? And the reality is, cities like the city of Bend are limited in what we can do because of state preemption. State law preempts cities in many cases from taking measures under city law to keep us safer. I totally support House Bill 2007. It is a no-brainer that a city should be able to keep somebody from bringing a loaded gun into a city hall. And frankly, it's insane to me that we don't already have that. So I'm glad the legislature is taking that out. We at the city are waiting and monitoring Measure 114 to make sure that we can implement it effectively and efficiently. We will, as the moment that it's able to be used as a law in our jurisdiction, the city will implement it. The police department, the city attorney's office are all watching it closely, and the moment that it is effective state law, it will be a tool of your city government to keep you safe, keep our kids safe in school. And I hope the beginning of additional measures, common sense gun safety measures that we can all rely on to keep us safer. I want to make sure that people understand that what we're hearing from the community is not don't do anything or do everything. The vast majority of what we're hearing in this community is common sense. I'm a hunter. I am very hard to get a hold of during hunting season, much to my wife and kids' chagrin. I'm late for Thanksgiving because I'm elk hunting. We even in the hunting community, I believe, see an absolute need for gun safety regulation. And that's what we are hearing from our constituents. And I want to make sure that you know, wherever you fall in the spectrum of gun safety, understand that the vast majority of us want common sense measures to keep our kids safe in school and all of us safe. I'll touch really briefly on measures that the city can take and will probably examine, although they are not on our city legislative agenda right now. One area that is not preempted by state law is the ability to regulate the possession of loaded firearms in public places. And that is a measure that I know most of city council, if not all of city council, is willing and ready to take up. We will wait again until the implementation of Measure 114 to see where that lands and if we need to take up other measures. We have met with our legislative delegation to analyze preemption in particular, because I think cities and counties should have the ability to make people safer than state law requires, and whether the state should regulate the possession and use of firearms when you're under the influence of alcohol or drugs, which, you know, again, as a hunter, is an absolute no-brainer to me that we would be able to regulate that. And then also, as Thomas mentioned, House Bill 2007, we've met with our delegation and leadership in the House to make sure that they understand that our ability to keep our employees safe in City Hall, our ability to keep leadership safe, and you as constituents when you come into City Hall is of utmost importance. House Bill 2007 or something like it has to pass. I, like you, want a Central Oregon where we do not have to experience gun violence, but I also want to just recognize events like a couple weeks ago at Bend High when the entire school had to be shut down because of the terror of the threat of gun violence. Even when people aren't physically hurt, this is an epidemic of trauma that we should not be inflicting on our children. We shouldn't be living in fear, and there are common sense measures we know we can all take to make us slightly better. Measure 114 isn't going to do it all by itself. This is one step on a long path towards a much safer community, and I'm really grateful to people at Bend and this entire region for getting this measure passed and keeping us all safer. So thank you very much.
Okay, if I'm not speaking loud enough, just tell me and I'll speak up. Okay. Hi, my name is Juniper Rook. I'm a junior at Redmond Proficiency Academy and a 17-year-old gun control activist. My work as an activist started in 2018 after the Stoneman Douglas shooting. Since then, my work has continued. It began with a walkout at my middle school and more recently working with the Yes on Measure 114 campaign and getting 114 passed. In 2018, I planned my very first walkout at my middle school. I had no idea what I was doing or how things like that go. About 40 other students walked out with me. There was some news coverage, and I gave my first ever speech about gun violence. From that point on, I've given campaign speeches, speeches at marches and rallies, speeches at walkouts, and I've given not so nice comments to our local Redmond City Council. Now, being older, while I'm happy that I got to do things like this and meet so many amazing people in the process, I always wonder what my life would be like without gun violence and activism. If I never felt obligated to speak up in 2019 when no one else was. One of the biggest things I've learned since 2018 was how little some people understand the wave of grief and anger that follows gun violence, specifically a school shooting. Every time I see a new headline or an Instagram infographic, I think about the parents and guardians now having a new hole in their families. I think about the kids not knowing what they're walking into at school the next day. I think about the kids, the teachers, and lastly, the kids who never thought about how gun violence could ever affect them, but now are forced to. Throughout the journey of my advocacy, I've gained a lot of new perspectives, but since October of my sophomore year of high school, I've gained what I think is one of the most important. I started working with kids as young as 6 months old and as old as 5 about a year ago. It has genuinely been one of the best things to ever happen to me. I get to watch these kids learn and grow into the most amazing little humans. But after the Uvalde shooting last year, I have become more aware of the role I now play in the lives of these children. The day after Uvalde, I went into work as I did almost every day, but the anxiety I had felt daily was amplified. Every ring at the door, every minute spent outside, I was on total alert. Even now, around 6 months after Uvalde, as a 17-year-old, I feel a kind of responsibility to the kids in the school I work at to protect them. Something no teacher, especially a student teacher, should have to feel. This new perspective has changed my activism drastically. I understand how the mothers, the fathers, even the grandparents and guardians must feel sending their kids to school each day. Now as a student teacher, when I imagine what my life free of gun violence would be like, I hope it's the life all the kids I work with get to live. My work in activism isn't just for the kids my age, it is for the kids I work with, the kids I may have someday, and it is for the kids to come long after I'm gone. Since I was around 12, I had dreamed of being a lawyer and making a difference. While my perspective has changed, so has my plan. I am now a double sport athlete on honor roll and am projected to earn my AP capstone diploma when I graduate. I plan to attend UC Berkeley and study political science. I will be going to school and getting my seat at the table. In October of last year, I had my 17th birthday, meaning I've been rallying, speaking, and marching for stricter gun laws for 5 years. It also means I will be voting in the next election. Something I've been waiting for since 2018. A lot of times when I look back on my past self, I see a little girl holding the same megaphone, getting ready to give her very first speech. Looking back, I still feel sad about all the childhood I missed out on because of how aware I've had to become. But now being so close to casting my first ballot, I know how proud she would be that we stuck with it. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank everyone here, and I want to thank my two speakers. Thank you very much, because you are the future. So, I've been an ER doctor for a long time.
I'm sorry, I can't quite hear you.
Okay, I've been an ER doctor for a long time. I'm not going to say, but it's over 30 years. Just look at my face. And during that time, I have worked at Level 1 Trauma Center at San Francisco General. I've worked at rural hospitals. I've worked in Tahoe. I've worked here. I've worked in the Bay Area, other smaller hospitals. And as an ER doctor, I work with a team of nurses, radiology techs, assistants, receptionists, everybody. When something comes in, like a gunshot, it affects everyone in that room. And it is not something that you can just say, okay, I've seen this gunshot wound, I've seen this person die, and then go home and say, oh, I'm good. It's hard. ER doctors, or doctors in general, have the highest suicide rate other than dentists, and I don't quite understand it. But we have a very high suicide rate, very high divorce rate, very high addiction rate. Part of that has to do with the incredible stress, with COVID as well. I held out till after COVID, and now I'm semi-retired. I still work some, I teach medical students. But I think that what I'd like to talk to you today about are a few things. One is I'm going to give you a few examples, and you have to excuse me, I will try not to be too graphic, of gun violence. And then I'm going to talk about a program that, as a community partner with Moms Demand Sense and Gun Owners for Responsible Ownership, we are working with St. Charles, and we are going to start something here in this town. Because part of what we have to do is not just treat, but prevent deaths. And for me, that is extremely important. So I'm going to take you back a few years when I was working at, I won't say which hospital, but it was a large hospital, and we had a call. It was a Code 3 ambulance. A 5-year-old had gotten into his parents' gun. This is, unfortunately, in America, a common occurrence, given that over 3,500 children die each year from either suicide or accidental deaths. So we're getting ready for this, knowing full well that this is going to be horrific. When the child arrived, we immediately wheeled the child into the trauma room. We got everything ready. We saw a single gunshot wound through the chest on the left side, exiting on the back side, and no vital signs. We had the trauma surgeon there, myself, we had nurses, very experienced nurses. We had to crack open the chest, massage the heart, and it went right through the heart. There was absolutely nothing we could do, nothing. And just to remind you that suicide, by the way, by gun is 95% successful. Suicide by pills is about 80% unsuccessful. So once you do that, and I'll give you another story about that too, but so when we finished with this, we couldn't find the mother, and we had to tell the mother. So I'm sorry if you can't hear me. So we couldn't find the mother, and we had to tell the mother. The mother, it was a busy ER, we had to move on to the next case. You move on, but your brain doesn't move on. You don't forget this. This is 20 years ago, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. And unfortunately, it's not the only gunshot death I've seen. I wish it had been. But you move on. And so we were coming in, and then we heard this scream. And it was a scream, not of terror, we've seen that, not of when somebody gets a broken bone or they have an IV stuck of pain, not of anger or psychoses. This was a scream from the soul, from deep within the soul, a scream. It still affects me, I'm sorry. A scream that I'm sure mothers or people around the world have heard, unfortunately. It was a scream of entire despair. The whole ER stopped. Our entire ER just stopped. And that was the mother who had just been told that her little baby had died. Why? Because there was an unattended gun. The baby got the gun and shot. The 5-year-old, got the gun, shot himself. This, unfortunately, is something that to this day affects me and my colleagues. I'm quite sure that every single ER doc in this country has not the privilege, but the unfortunate duty of attending to gunshot victims, because we are unique in all industrialized nations of having the highest gun violence of any industrial. It is ridiculous, it is horrible, and as an ER doctor, as somebody who has experienced it on this level, I beg you, please do everything you can. I do not want to ever have to see this again. Moving on. I was working in San Francisco General. I'm talking about suicides now. As I mentioned, I've seen quite a few suicides to the head, and I've only seen one survive, and that person was brain dead. But what happened one day when I was working at San Francisco General, I talked to somebody who had jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge. Now, we call them bridge jumpers. It's kind of a way and you know what he said to me? He came in for something else. What did he say to me? He said, halfway down, I didn't want to do it. That is every one of the suicides, virtually every one of the suicide attempts I have seen on pills, whatever. There is a change, and they say, no, I wish I hadn't taken those pills, and we are successful, not with guns. 60% of the kids that die in this country are guns. 80% overall by suicide. The gun deaths, are by suicide with guns, and they're successful because once that gun goes in, it causes damage beyond just it's a whole lecture I could give about gun damage, but basically we can't do anything. You're done. And so that is yet another reason. While I was working at San Francisco General, and this is only in America, ladies and gentlemen, we had somebody come in, one of those gang wars, right? And the patient was shot, right? So we rush him in to the trauma room. Unbeknownst to us, he had a gun. That gun went off and blew a hole in the ceiling where they're operating upstairs. Does this sound like Beirut? Does this sound like Vietnam? This is not. This is inner city. This is inner city minorities, a lot of them. This is ridiculous. Ridiculous. We have to get trauma training like the military gets trauma training because we see that. I used to see, at San Francisco General, we used to see 2 or 3 gunshots come in at once when they had those gang wars. So mass shooting, all the time. So after so many years, I just have gotten sick of it. And what really brought it down was our daughter, who was working at Whole Foods when they had that gunshot. In Safeway, and she called us from Whole Foods, and they had put him in the freezer. She's sitting there in the freezer, scared, and I'm getting a call from my daughter. And I said, that's it, I'm done. I'm getting active more than I have been, and this is enough. Enough is enough, ladies and gentlemen. Please, please work with me. Now, what am I doing right now is I talk to administration at St. Charles. So I'm an ER doctor still at St. Charles not working as much, almost out of there, but I did talk to them, and what we are starting, which is a start, we start with baby steps. Remember, St. Charles is a nonprofit organization, but they are allowed to take a stand. Providence took a stand for 114, but St. Charles isn't there yet. So we're starting with baby steps. What are we doing? Well, we got a grant. I'm working as a community partner with Moms Demand Action. We got a grant for 1,200 gun locks from St. Charles. Now, what's going to happen with these gun locks? We, that is myself and Brandy Stiftheimer, who is one of the directors of the local Moms Demand Action group, we are going to meet with each clinical head. So we're going to meet with pediatrics, we're going to meet with internal medicine, family practice, mental health, ER, and develop a plan whereby patients can be given gun locks free. Which patients do you want them? Well, there'll be patients who have children at home, would be my highest priority. Patients who have people who are suffering from mental health disorders, patients, domestic violence, whatever it is, we want them to know how to use that gun lock. We want them to use that gun lock. We are going to start this in the next few months, and it's a slow process because we have to train people. Plus, you can imagine in certain areas of Oregon, if you say the word gun control or gun lock even, there is a reaction like, I'm gonna kill you. And by the way, that's another thing I want you guys to know. I have been through many, many lockdowns. Every single hospital I have has had a lockdown, somebody threatening gun violence. So I know that feeling, and it's just beyond it. We need to approach gun violence like we approach any other epidemic. What do we do when we have an epidemic? What do we do with COVID? We do research, we publish studies, we decide what works, what doesn't work, and we take action. We don't sit back and we don't do thoughts and prayers. Thoughts and prayers don't do squat. I'm sorry if I sound mad, but I am mad. What does is we need to take action. And with that, I'm going to end. And thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Knowing this group, I know you all have lots of questions. I want to make sure that Thomas Wheatley is able to hear any questions that you have. So what I'm going to suggest is anyone who has a question, form a line right here, and you can take turns filing through and asking your questions. I have one question, so please start coming up if you're interested. I have a question that was emailed in by one of our members who could not be here today, so I'll just start with that. Some of it is similar to what Thomas gave in his talk, because he's mentioning about House Bills 2005, 2006, 2007. But this person was referencing a column that was written by Nicholas Kristof, and some of the suggestions that he had were using a public health approach, which you've kind of talked about, and you framing gun safety as a public health issue to reduce gun violence using a harm reduction approach, to make firearms safer using a thumbprint lock like there are on some phones, and limiting access to those most likely to misuse. Other measures that he talked about were things that we've done similar to improve safety of automobiles. So the analogous safety measures for guns would be required background checks, safe storage, ending immunity for firearm companies, limit the number of gun purchases per month, ban bump stocks. You already addressed the bill, House Bill 2006, that is talking about increasing the age limit to purchase guns. Another suggestion of Nicholas Kristof was background checks to buy ammunition, allow research in gun violence, and research smart guns. So there's a whole lot there for you to address, and if there are those of you on the panel who would like to address some of those things, and then please, I know you have questions, so please come up.
by saying, I think all of those are great, generally great ideas, and the idea of using a public health approach, I think, is definitely all of the way we intend and are working to go about this issue. 60-something years ago, my grandfather was part of the research team at Cornell University that did the research that ultimately led to the requirement that seatbelts were required in cars. And when public health researchers were trying to figure out how to reduce injuries and deaths in cars and automobiles, they didn't ban cars. They made cars and drivers safer. And I think that's what I think a public health approach to gun violence prevention seeks to do, is to make firearm owners safer and firearms safer, and ensure that firearms don't end up in the hands of people who shouldn't have them. And so there are lots and lots of ways to go about that, lots of policies to proceed, to pass. But I would say that the challenge here is that the NRA and the gun lobby are so well organized and mobilized that even some of our friendly lawmakers get nervous when we propose ambitious, bold, significant policy changes on gun violence prevention, which is frankly why the voters ended up taking up the permit to purchase policy last year. Lawmakers would not pass that policy. They had been introduced a number of years and they declined to pass it. So we need to, even among our friends in the legislature and in local and in legislative office, we need to make sure they know they have our support to be bold in addressing this crisis.
Thank you, Thomas. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can't hear me?
No.
Thomas can hear you, but they can't.
Yeah, come closer.
Can you hear me now?
No.
Why don't you come closer up here?
Well, then he won't be able to hear me because
Yes,
the
he
mic is here.
Okay.
I'll speak loud. So now I've almost forgotten what I was going to ask. Just a minute here. Yeah, on the federal level, how can we help you as a League of Women Voters? Is there some way that we can help you? And then I'm going to ask a couple other questions and then let them answer in the order. So that's my question to you, is how League of Women Voters can help you in your efforts. I want to thank you, Juniper. You were very impressive, and I hope you someday run for office. I can tell you that I ran for office. I'm now a city councilor, and it was scary. I hate the campaign stuff. I didn't do much of it. But once you're in office, it's a very rewarding thing. I've only been doing it for a month and a half, and I'm so glad I ran. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name, sir, on the...
Anthony.
Anthony. Thank you so much for Ben Council standing up. I'm hoping that I can influence Sister City Council to do the same, and would like to talk to you afterwards about that. And your story, sir, was very, very touching. And again, I have the same question to you. How can League of Women Voters help you in your effort for these gun locks? I'm done.
Well, I can. Sorry.
So I think Thomas wants to answer first.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
okay, go ahead.
I'll briefly answer the first question, and thank you to the council member who just spoke. And I should also say, boy, what a great panel. I'm sorry I'm not there in person to see you all. So I think for the League of Women Voters, locally and statewide, I think continuing to do the work that you do, which is educating the public and educating elected officials. I think our elected officials need to hear early and often that we expect that they will take bold action, and we appreciate their leadership when they do. So, Councilmember Broadman, thank you, and Bend City Council for backing 114. That was a big deal for the campaign to have that support, and for you personally for speaking out. And I think our legislators and executive branch elected officials and local elected officials need to know that our expectation as voters is that we will be even bolder going forward. And so it's a matter of engineering that constituent contact, appreciating our leaders when they lead, and when they are not leading boldly, asking them to think bigger.
Thank you.
As far as how sisters can help, I'm just going to address what we can do. Talk to St. Charles. Let administration know that what they're doing is great, because they're very worried about public opinion. Rightfully so. That's the way it is. That we live in an environment like that. So let them know. Let your local providers, the St. Charles Family Practice over there, let them know that you support it and that you want this kind of thing. And we will get it to the sisters, I promise you. But keep up the good work.
Has there been press on this relationship? Excuse me for just interrupting, but that's how I do.
A little bit, but not much. We could use
So
more
there hasn't
press.
been an article in the bulletin?
No,
already?
but I'm hoping there will be. Kay Mendenhall, she's the PR officer, and I'm working with her, and they're going to have a press release. So
Okay.
we could use the press. Yes.
Hi, I just want to say thank you so much for this panel. Fantastic. I've been taking lots of. I want to say thank you so much for this panel. I've been taking lots of notes on my phone, and I'm particularly interested in locally having just experience as a mom getting a text from my daughter from Bend High saying there's somebody in the building and SWAT is here. And which nobody was actually in the building, but the fright and the fear, regardless of harm, was incredibly disturbing for me as a mom. And I want to hear a little bit more on potential partnerships with regard to Rick's movement or initiative here. And I'm wondering, speaking with regard to the school district, with regard to Bend PD, with regard to St. Charles and other things like other entities that have power in numbers. And I'm curious, can more partnerships happen with regard to gun safety, particularly gun locks? Because I know you can go to Bend PD and get a gun lock, but I don't know how much instruction or how much visibility that opportunity is for folks.
I can just address school district. I am more than willing to work with the school district. And I know St. Charles is as well. We can give talks, we can work, and it's a question of the left hand needs to know what the right hand is doing, like anything else in human affairs, right? And that's how ER docs make mistakes, by the way, is not knowing the left hand versus the right hand. So you have to see the whole picture and then move in. And yes, I am absolutely willing to do that. There is something called a red flag law. You might want to correct me, but I think half the ER docs don't even know that exists. In other words, when you get somebody in the emergency room who is a threat to themselves or others and has a gun at home, we cannot take the gun away, but we can call PD or we can call mental health, and they can. That is something that we need to explore more. It's politically explosive, and I don't know how Bend PD feels about that. You might want, I'll leave it up to Anthony, but it's something that I think needs to be explored.
Yeah, Doc, and I don't know that it is, I may be so naive that I don't know that it's politically explosive. I know that we have a disproportionately high use of the ERPO, the red flag orders in our county, in our region, which is a bad thing, but it's also a good thing because people are using them to remove weapons from dangerous situations. So I'm really proud. I mean, one of the first things we talked about when we've had Moms Demand Action come in, and after the Safeway shooting, one of the first and most comforting things that we had was our chief of police outlining our frequent use of of these tools to get guns out of dangerous situations. I think we're all for, I mean, one of the great things about this community is when there are tools like gun locks available, if they were available in schools, and we come together around issues like this. So I'm excited to, lend my support however we can at the city. And I think gun locks, at least in Bend, I don't know how it is, in other places, but I think gun locks are non-controversial. I hope they are. They should be. Even people who have lots of firearms in their houses, should have lots of gun locks.
Yes.
Safe storage is the law, and if you're not following the law, there's a reason for these policies to be in place. So I would just say that I think that you'll find a lot of support in the community. I think getting these into the hands of students who have a very different view of gun safety than a lot of their parents is a really good tool. Students able to pick up a gun lock at school, whether they don't have to seek permission from their parents to pick up a gun lock. I think that's a really reasonable tool.
Sorry, I have one more thing to say about that. I think that another big thing solving this issue of just like overall gun violence in our community is just education is a really big thing. Last year, I think it was around December, all of the school boards were voting on policy KGGB, which was it was take action against allowing weapons on school grounds from citizens, students, and just like anyone in general. And I'm pretty sure that the Bend School District did pass it, but I know for a fact that the Redmond School District did not pass it. And a lot of people don't know that. And I think that like having these kinds of like open conversations with like, I bet in Bend that, some people might know about KGGB, but I was talking to Liz, one of the members of the school board, and the difference between opinions and want for action, like a 30-minute drive away is so severe to the point where like you can bring a weapon onto school grounds in Redmond. And it's not an actual policy.
Hi, my name is Gail Stamler. I've been living in Bend since 2000.
Can you shout, please?
I've been living in Bend since 2013. And when I first moved here, can you not hear me still? Okay. When I first moved here, I joined the Bend chapter of Moms Demand Action, which was new, I think, at that time. And I was wondering what the status of it is now, because it's kind of become invisible. Does anybody know?
I can speak to that.
Thank you.
That was my question.
Sure. I have been working with Moms Demand Action. I started out, I just heard the talk and I said, hey, I'd like to talk about it. It was a talk in Drake Park, and I just gave a spontaneous, extemporaneous talk because I feel so strongly about it. And actually now they are very well organized. Brandy Stifttimer is on it, and actually she'd be here today, except she's in Salem because there is a legislative meeting or something going on about gun violence, and they are taking part of it. So yes, it is, and if you get on the internet, you will find it, and I'm part of their community partner. So yes.
I have a question. Nellie Conti, I've lived in Bend since 1980. What about the opportunity of providing events for these gun locks, like in a park on a Saturday or at a venue somewhere, where we're not just handing out the gun locks, but we're actually encouraging people within the community to bring in their rifles, their shotguns, their pistols, unloaded of course.
And turn them in?
No, but giving them hands-on education about the gun locks, how they are to be applied to their weapons.
Oh.
I mean, I'm a hunter. I think this gentleman could tell I've got some oak ivory earrings in. I shoot, I hunt, and I fish, but I do understand that, and I've got grandchildren, and by God, I don't want my grandchildren to become a victim of some sort of gun violence at a school or something like that. Is that something that would even be possible? To have a hands-on education?
So a couple things. Just my own opinion, I don't think we want people to bring firearms loaded or unloaded to parks. There actually is a city law that prevents that from happening. So.
Or at a venue somewhere.
Right. I have gotten the free gun locks at multiple events in Drake Park. I only take one because I want other people to have them.
Sure.
But it's Brandy and Moms Demand Action frequently hand those out. You can get them from the police department. I would say, I would pivot a little bit to what Measure 114 does, and that is part of that permit to purchase. My expectation is when that training goes into place, gun storage will be part of that. And I think it would be a safe environment. If somebody decides they want to purchase a firearm, they would also need to learn how to store it safely. That's some of the voter intent behind passing 114. I think the more gun safe we can talk, here's the reality. There's enough guns in our homes right now that if they stopped being sold tomorrow, we would still have a gun violence problem. So limiting sales, well, that is an issue. You don't want to sell guns to the wrong people. We have enough guns right now in our homes within a couple miles of this building that we need to address the issue that they need to be used safely, they need to be stored safely, they need to be transferred safely. So I think your point is a really good one. Let's have this conversation out in the open. More than half of us, I believe, in the county have guns in our homes. So let's be honest and open. If you have a gun in your home, you don't want your child to accidentally shoot somebody. You don't want to accidentally shoot yourself. You don't want to mentally, somebody who's suffering from mental illness, to know that you have a weapon that is unsecured and take it and use it to harm themselves or somebody else. So to your point, I think it's really important that we have this open and honest conversation about what it really means to live in America right now. And it means we are surrounded by firearms. And we have to be honest and open about that.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask a real quick question to Juniper. I've been to a couple of marches that she's organized before, and I noticed that predominantly they're made up of young people. I'd like to know if you think they would be more impactful if there were people, more like the people in this room, would participate.
Yes. It's definitely, I feel like you have to know the room you're speaking to. Like when I talk to young people, it's like, oh, come on guys, like let's go. And I feel like today, I'm trying to do both of that because marches and rallies are for everybody, protests are for everybody, and having people who can like actually vote there is really important because, I can't go tell the kids at my school to go vote because we can't vote yet. And when I spoke at a Yes on Measure 114 like campaign fundraiser thing, I don't remember what month it was, I feel like it was September, but, and I remember like, it was so crazy finally getting to talk to people who vote because usually like walkouts at schools and even in the community, it's usually younger people. So getting to see like a new demographic that can vote is really nice. So yes, please come. Yes.
It's after 1 o'clock now, and I know some people still have questions. If you can linger a little bit, you can mingle and ask your questions in a few minutes. But I definitely want to thank Juniper for being here and for all of her youthful enthusiasm. I think she's going to have an impact for years and years and years. For Dr. Teitz for sharing his stories, for Councilman Broadman for being here. So I really appreciate all of them. I especially want to thank the event manager here at UU because we really raised the bar today on trying to make both a remote portion of the meeting happen and the in-person meeting. And I know that there was definitely a lot of sweating, cursing going on to try to make this happen. So thank you, Jonathan, for making this possible to hear both from